In this video, we're going to cover the very basic principles of rigging. So if you've never rigged anything before, if you've never rigged a character or an object before, and you'd like to kind of see or learn about the way that rigging works, I think this video is for you. Maybe you know a little bit about rigging, but you want to expand your knowledge. You might learn something from this video as well. This is very basic stuff though, so if you are comfortable with rigging, you might not learn something, you might not learn anything new, but who knows? Maybe stick around, watch, maybe you'll learn something, maybe you can give me some suggestions as well. So the first basic principle of rigging we're going to talk about is called parenting. Parenting consists of two or more objects. One of them is going to be called the parent, and the others are either the child or the children. Now, the parent, as the parent moves, the child will always follow the parent. But the child can also sort of move around on its own. We all know kids, they kind of bounce off the walls. But the parent, the parent goes anywhere, the child will go with it. So the parent can't really go anywhere without the child. So let's look at this in an example. I'm going to create a couple cubes here. And we have a p cube 1 and a p cube 2. So let's call p cube 1 the parent, and we'll call p cube 2 the child. So in order to make these a parent group, this is going to be the parent and this is going to be the child. What we have to do is first select the child. Whenever you're parenting, the child always comes first, right? So our selection order, whenever we're parenting, we're always going to select the child first. So I'm going to select the child, I'm going to shift select the parent, and then hit my P key, P for parent. And that's going to do a couple things that we're going to see automatically in our viewport and in our outliner. In our viewport, you'll notice that if I select the parent, it also selects the child. If I select the child, however, it just selects the child. So if I move the parents around, the child will move around as well. If I rotate this, the child will rotate with the parent. And if I scale, the child will also scale with the parent. Now, if I look over at my outliner, I'll see that basically the child object got put inside of the parent object, right? I can unparent an object by selecting the child and hitting Shift P, and that will unparent that object. I can also parent an object just by middle mouse clicking and dragging it into the other object. So this will also parent the object. Now, you can have more than one child. So if I grab this duplicate here and move that away, now we can see that this parent has child 1 and child 2. And as I move around the parent, both of the children will follow the parent, but the children can also move around independently of each other. Now you can also sort of have like this hierarchy of grandparents and grandchildren, so to speak. So if I take child 1 and put this inside child 2 or child, now we have this hierarchy where we have a parent, or we move both of these around. Then I have a child with a child, right? So this one's going to move together, and then this one will move around independently. So this is, in a nutshell, this is the basic, very basic form of rigging, right? Super basic form of rigging. So how would we rig something using this parenting method. So let's create a couple cubes here. So I'm going to create an arm. So let's say that these cubes are going to represent an arm. So I have one cube. I'm going to duplicate this, and then this is going to be the hand. Okay, so let's give these a name. So this will be upper arm, lower arm, and hand. So the first thing I want to do here is before I parent these to each other, I want to make sure that their pivot points are set up correctly. So currently, if I rotate this object around, it's going to rotate around the center. I don't want it to rotate around the center. I want it to rotate around where the shoulder would be. So I'm going to move the pivot point. To do that, I'm going to hit my D key, D for dog, and then just move my pivot point to where the shoulder would be there. I'll hit my D key again, select the lower arm, move my pivot point to where the elbow would be, hit D, and then hit D again, move my pivot point to where the wrist would be for the hand, and then hit D again. Now I can parent these together. So I'm going to select the sort of like the youngest child, so to speak, first. So I'm going to select the hand, which is going to be a child of the lower arm. So I'm going to select the hand, then shift select the lower arm and hit P. Then I'm going to select the lower arm, shift select the upper arm and hit P. Right, so now we see this sort of hierarchy of objects in our outliner. This is a very basic, simple arm rig, very rudimentary arm rig that we just created. Now, if I try rotating this here where the shoulder would be, it's going to rotate fine. But if I try rotating here where the lower arm is, I'm going to get this weird thing happening where all of my geometry is going to kind of skew like this. This is because these objects have transforms and history. So in order for me to get these to rotate correctly, I need to delete their history and freeze their transforms. So I'm going to select this first object. I'm going to freeze the transforms, delete the history. And then I'm going to do that to these other objects as well. So this one freezes transforms. I'm in the modeling menu. This button freezes your transforms and this deletes your history. So now whenever I rotate this, I can rotate the upper arm and everything rotates with it. And then I rotate the lower arm and the hand. So this is a very rudimentary way of rigging a object or multiple objects. And this is what's known as FK, excuse me, FK animation. FK stands for forward kinematics. And this basically just refers to the way that we're animating this arm by rotating all of the joints. Later on, we'll get into something called IK or inverse kinematics. So this will make a little bit more sense as we move forward. But parenting is about the most basic of principles for rigging. And you can do some very rudimentary rigs with just parenting your objects together. All right, so the next principle, basic principle of rigging we're going to talk about is constraints. You can think of constraints as sort of a advanced parenting mechanism. It's advanced because you have a lot more control with constraints, and you can constrain things specifically by axis or by transform. So we can constrain translates, which is location, basically, like where your object is located. This is known as a point constraint. We can constrain rotates, which is a orient constraint. We can constrain scale and aim. And then we get into something called a pull vector constraint as well, which is something we'll use quite a bit for rigging in a lot of situations. So let's take a look at how to use constraints. So I'm going to, once again, we'll create another couple cubes here. And when it comes to constraints, whereas parents, you have a parent and a child, with constraints, we have instead what I'm going to call the driver with a big R, and driven with a big N. So we can think of this as kind of the child and this as the parent. So this one will be the driver and this will be the driven. So whenever you create constraints, the selection order is the opposite as parenting. So instead of selecting what we would consider the child first, we're going to select the parent first, or what you can consider the driver. So I'm going to select the driver and then shift select the driven. And then we'll come to our animation menu, come up to constrain, and we'll just start with this first one here called a parent constraint. So this is basically going to act pretty similar to just parenting two objects together. The main difference you're going to notice is that this pCube2 did not get put inside of this pCube1, and instead this pCube2 got a little extra node attached to it there. This is the constraint node. So it still pretty much acts like a parent connection, right? I can rotate, I can scale. They kind of move with each other. Scale works a little bit differently. You can see that this one isn't scaling up, but this one is. So scale works a little bit differently, but for the most part, a parent constraint is kind of just constraining all of these together. So translates and rotates. So in order to unconstrain something, like if I want to break this constraint, what I need to do is select it again. So I'm going to select the driver first, shift select the driven, and we're going to go to constrain and remove target. And you'll see that that takes that extra little node out of that pCube2, and now our objects are no longer constrained to each other. So let's look at some of the other constraints. So if we want to create a translate or a point constraint, so let's select our driver, shift select our driven, and we'll go to constrain and point constraint. And I want to look at the options here. Now, if I just sort of constrain it as it is, so if I just use all these default options and click apply, my pCube2 is going to bounce and just sort of snap over to the exact location of my pCube1. That's not really what I want in this example, so I'm going to undo that, Control Z. And instead, I want to make sure that I check this maintain offset checkbox. And that will basically tell it, you stay where you're at, but I still want you constrained to the other object. So I'm going to check that maintain offset, and that's it. Now we can also constrain individual axes. So I can constrain individual axes as well. But for now, let's just hit apply, close. And now I have my driver driving the driven. I can still move this one around freely. And this is only a translate or a point constraint. So if I rotate this, we can see that this does not rotate, right? So this is not being driven by this one's rotations. It's only being driven by its translations. Right, so once again, we can remove that constraint by selecting both of those and going to remove target. Now, next up, we have a orient constraint. So an orient constraint is going to do sort of the same thing, but instead of constraining the translations, it's going to constrain the rotations. So I can, once again, we'll check maintain offset, click apply, close. And now as I move this around, this object stays put. But as I rotate it, this object will move around as well. Okay, once again, we will constrain, remove target to get rid of that constraint. Let's look at a scale constraint. Once again, I like to always check maintain offset. Otherwise, it just kind of snaps to the same position, which I don't necessarily always want. We'll click add. And now I can move, rotate this around. Nothing's going to change. But if I scale it up, this one will scale up as well. Okay, and then finally we have an aim constraint. So an aim constraint is basically just going to make this one always aim towards this other object. So aim constraints are used often for rigging like the eyes. So you can have the eyes always pointing towards a controller, and wherever you move that controller around, that's where the eyes will look and that's where the eyes will move. So that's one example of how you would use an aim constraint. So let's select our driver, shift select our driven, constrain. Once again, aim constraint, I'm going to choose maintain offset. There's quite a bit of other options there that we're not going to talk about in these videos, but for the most part, we're just going to click add. And now as I move this object around, my other object will always aim towards this object. You can see that rotation does nothing, scale does nothing, but as I move it around, this one will aim towards that one. Now we also have something called a pull vector constraint, which we're not really going to get into yet. This is something that we will use while rigging, but for now, we're going to kind of skip over this one and just kind of cover these here. So that's constraints. That's the second principle of basic rigging. You have parenting, and then you have constraining, which in a sense is just sort of like a more advanced way to parent an object with a lot more control over your objects. Okay, the next this is a twofer. We're going to talk about two different things this time. We're going to talk about controllers and set driven keys. This is a big one. Both of these are kind of big ones, but this is where things start to get a little bit more complicated in terms of how we rig something. So imagine a controller as just another object that you can select and move around to control another object, right? So the only purpose of a controller, or one of the main purposes of a controller, is so that we have something to select and move around that isn't the object, and that we can add extra attributes to if we need to. So let's look at an example of what a controller is. So if I have a sphere and we want to give this a controller, let's say I'm going to make my controller a curve node. So I'm going to go over to curves, and I'm just going to create a circle curve, and this is going to be my controller. So I'm going to go ahead and name this controller. right? So basically what I want to be able to do is select this and move it around the way that I want to move it around, and the other object will move around with it. So in a simple way, all I really need to do is constrain this sphere to this object, right? So if I want this to control just translates, I can. So let's say I have this controller and I just want this to control my translates. So I'm going to select the driver, which is the controller, shift select the driven, and we're going to go to constrain point. So now we have a situation where I can grab my circle, move it around, and my sphere will move around with it, right? But if I rotate my circle, nothing happens. So if I turn the wireframe on here, we can see that the sphere is not rotating with the controller. Now, one kind of neat thing that you can do is, say there's a situation where I want to be able to rotate my sphere, but I want to grab the sphere and rotate it. And as I'm rotating it, I want the controller to move with it. So what I can do is I can now constrain the sphere to the controller, or the controller to the sphere, vice versa. So while the controller has a point constraint, it's constraining the translations of the sphere, I can constrain the rotations of the circle to the sphere. So I'm going to select the sphere. In this case, this is going to be my driven. Shift select the circle, and I'm going to go to constrain, orient. So now we have a situation where I am constraining my translations of the circle. If I rotate the circle, nothing happens. But if I grab the sphere and rotate the sphere, the circle or the controller also moves as well. I know it's hard to see with the color that I have in the background. There we go. Makes it a little bit easier to see like that. Now, let's imagine that I want to do something a little bit differently. Maybe I want to have another controller on this, and I want this controller to drive the scale. So that's easy enough to do. I can just create another little circle here. We can rotate it like this. And I can just make this a scale constraint, right? Right. So now as I move this, the scale of the circle will move as well. But say, for example, I don't want to have that many controllers. Say I just want to have one controller that kind of controls everything. This is where set driven keys come in. So let me just undo. So now we're just back to one major controller. So let's say I want this controller to control the position of our sphere, but I also want it to control the scale of my sphere. So what I need to do is use something called set driven keys. So the first thing I need to do in order to make a set driven key is add attributes to my controller. So to do that, I'm going to select my controller. I'm going to go to modify, add attribute. And we'll name this attribute S. Let's name it C for controller, scale X. I'm going to make my minimum a -10, my maximum a 10, and then I'll leave my default at a 0. And if we hit add, we're going to see a new C scale X attribute. Now, currently this attribute isn't going to do anything. It's just there and it's just some numbers. It's not really doing anything at the moment. I'm going to go ahead and create a C scale Y with the same values, -10, and positive 10 and a default of 0. And I'm going to do a C scale Z with a negative 10, a positive 10, and a default of 0. Add and close. So now we have the attributes that we're going to need to drive the scale of this object. So now I need to connect it up or set the keys that's going to animate this whenever I move these values around. So to do that, we're going to go to our animation menu and we're going to go to Key, Set Driven Key, Set. Now, the way this works is we need to load a driver and we need to load a driven. So my driver is obviously going to be my controller. So I'm going to say load driver. My driven is obviously going to be my sphere. So I'm going to say load driven. And now I can connect the C scale here to the scale of my sphere here. Right now, as it stands, my sphere is in a neutral position. It's scaled the way that I want it to. So it's at its default position. My value here is at its default position. And my value of the scale of the sphere is at its default position. So as it is, I'm just going to go ahead and key it where it's at. And that will key it at its default position. It's a very important step to do first. Next, I'm going to scale it. So I'm going to select my C scale X, and we're going to do negative 10. And then I'm going to select my sphere and scale that in the negative X value. Right, so we're going to go all the way down to something like a scale of 1. Right, so now I can hit key. And now if I select my controller, you can see that we're at negative 10. But if I select this and then middle mouse drag to scale this up, it will go to 0. Now you can see that anything above 0, it doesn't really happen or nothing really happens to it. That's just because we haven't set that key yet. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's set our value here all the way up to 10. Then going to select our sphere. We'll scale this up to something like, let's do a value of 7. And we'll set our key. So now you can see that if I grab this and I slide this back and forth, we're going to scale all the way down to negative 10 and positive 10. And that's basically going down to a scale of 1 and up to a scale of 7. Right, so let's zero that out and let's just quickly do the other set driven keys as well. So I'm going to switch to C scale Y and my scale Y. Go ahead and key it at its default setting. We're going to set our C scale Y down to negative 10. I'll then grab my sphere and do my Y scale down to a 1 like we had the other one. We're going to set the key. Then we'll select our C scale Y, go up to 10 with that, then select our sphere, go up to 7 with that, and set another key. And then we're just going to rinse and repeat for the scale Z. So select scale Z, key that at its default position. Bring this down to negative 10, and then we can do a 1 scale here, key that, bring that up to its positive 10, do a scale of 7, and key that. So now on this one controller, I have all these attributes, and I can add as many of these attributes as I want. So I have all these attributes where I can sort of control the scale of my object or any other attribute that I want. Now, what's really cool about this is if I select all 3 of these and I scale up and down, I'm scaling uniformly. right? In this case, let's do this again. There we go. So now I'm scaling uniformly. So this is used quite a bit in things like individual animations for individual fingers. You can do like finger curls and things like that. You can basically give one little curve object a lot of different attributes and a lot of different ways to control a single object. And the final two basic principles of rigging we're going to talk about are joints and IK handles. So if you remember earlier, we talked about FK, which is when you're animating something by rotating the joints. This is IK, or inverse kinematics. So before we get into this, let's talk about joints. So if I go over to my rigging menu here, you'll see that we have a joint menu here. A bunch of different things going on here, but let's just grab our joint, create joint tool. And then I'm going to just click on my grid to create these joints. Right now, if we look at our outliner and we look at the sort of hierarchy of these joints, you'll see something very familiar if you think back to parenting, right? So this is sort of a very similar hierarchy structure to parenting. And in fact, whenever we create our joint or our skeletal structure, where these things are basically just parented to each other. And in fact, if I want to unparent them, so for example, I can take this joint here and unparent it from this joint by selecting the child and hitting Shift P, right? And then that unparents it from that joint. If I want, I can parent it and parent it to this joint. So I can hold down the child, select the child, Shift select the parent, hit P, and now this is parented to that joint instead. So the way the joint structure works is basically a parenting mechanism. So you can now see how that's like a very basic way of creating joints, and parenting is basically the root or the very simple way to rig a character. Now, just to kind of show you one step further here, the other thing that we're not going to dive too deeply into today, but that's skinning. So if you have an object and then you have a skeletal structure inside of it, and you want to skin or attach that structure to your joints or your skeleton, this is the way that you're going to do it. So let's start just by creating a cylinder here. And I'm going to add a bunch of divisions to the cylinder so it will actually bend whenever we put our joint structure inside of it. And then we'll jump over to, say, our side view here. Let's look at our wireframe. And then I'm going to go back over to my rigging menu. And then let's put a joint structure inside of this. Right now, if I select my joint structure, Shift select my object and skin it, which is bind skin, which is this button right here. Now, if I select my individual joints on my structure, my skeletal structure, the object will bend with those joints. So I don't want to get too deeply into this because weight skinning and painting weights and things like that, those are a little bit more intermediate topics. I want to keep to the basics here. So I don't want to get too deeply into skinning and painting weights and stuff like that. So we'll go ahead and delete these. And then the next thing I want to talk about is IK handles, or inverse kinematics. So let's create a simple joint structure like this. And then if we wanted to animate this, we have FK, right? So FK is, once again, we have FK over here, which is forward. kinematics. This is where essentially you're going to be rotating things as you're animating them. So you're just going to be using your rotates. And then you have IK. So IK is a way to sort of like connect this joint to this joint. So if you were to imagine this were an arm, this is the shoulder, this is the elbow, and this is the hand, right? You want to be able to select the hand and move it around without sort of selecting the shoulder and rotating that, and then selecting the elbow and rotating that. So we're going to do this with an IK handle. So to add an IK handle, we're going to go to our IK handle tool, which is right here. I'm going to select my shoulder joint and then select my wrist joint. And this is going to create an IK handle. And this thing right here is what's called our pull vector. So we'll get back to that here shortly. But what this allows me to do is just grab this IK handle, and then I can move this around freely, and the elbow sort of follows where that joint will go. So you can see that if I'm animating a situation where I have a character and I want to grab their hand and bring it towards a cup or a glass or a sword or something like that, so they pick up that sword, it's much easier to do it this way, where I can just grab their hand and move it around, rather than having a situation like an FK, forward kinematic situation, where I have to rotate these individually. That's going to be a lot more difficult to manipulate than the IK handle. Right, so we have FK, which is forward kinematics. This is where we animate by rotating all the joints. And then we have inverse IK kinematics, where we can animate just by moving around, sort of like an IK handle, to where we want it to go. Now, with everything that we've learned so far, we're going to do a little exercise, and we're going to create something called the reverse foot. Now, the reverse foot is a sort of classic rigging term. This basically is a way to rig a leg and foot in a way where the feet stay planted on the ground. So this will make a little bit more sense as we move forward. Now, to my knowledge, not everyone uses the reverse foot. It's kind of an old school thing. I know a lot of people still do use the reverse foot, but in a lot of modern rigging situations, people don't really use the reverse foot that often, from what I can see. But it's still a very good rigging exercise. And I think if you can manage to rig a reverse foot, you're well on your way to starting to figure out how to rig pretty much anything, right? So we're going to rig a reverse foot. So we're going to start in our side view here. So I'm going to go over to my side view, and we're going to zoom out a little bit. And I want to here's my sort of grid line, 0 grid line here. So I'm going to bring that down, because that's going to be kind of like my floor. For this situation, I'm going to turn on snap to grid, so we can snap to grids, and this would just help me line things up a little bit better. And then I'm going to go to my joint tool, and I'm going to create a leg and foot joint structure. So I'm going to start somewhere around here. This is going to be my hip. Then we're going to go down to the knee. Then this is going to be the ankle, the ball of the foot, and then the toe of the foot. So this is my basic foot or leg joint structure. I'm going to go ahead and name these just for the sake of organization. It's going to get very confusing if you don't name them, because just trust me, go ahead and name them now. It's going to be a lot easier if you're following along with this exercise. So we're going to name this top the leg joint This will be the knee joint. This will be the ankle joint, the ball joint, and the toe joint. All right, so if we jump back over to our perspective, you'll see that we have kind of a basic leg going here. Now, for now, I'm just going to turn Snap to Grid off. I will turn it back on here in a second, but you can see that we can, basically just rotate things around and animate them with FK, forward kinematics. Now, I want to be able to bend this leg down and have the knee bend. So I want an IK handle going from the leg joint to the ankle joint. So I'm going to go to my IK handle tool, and we're going to select the leg joint down to the ankle joint, and there is my IK handle. So now I can grab this IK handle and move it around. I'm going to change the name of this to IK handle foot. Once again, if you're following along with me, I really recommend naming these things. It's going to get confusing if you don't. Now, here's the deal. I have a IK handle now where I can move the leg around. However, I don't really have any control over the knee. I have this thing called a pole vector up here, but I can't select it and I can't move the pole vector around. If I rotate the IK handle, it doesn't really do anything. So I want to be able to control the knee. So in order to do that, I need to create what's called a pole vector constraint. So I'm going to jump back over to my side view, and we're going to create a locator. I'm going to move that locator somewhere around the front of the knee. So somewhere right around there. You can jump into the perspective view and kind of see what that looks like. Right? And now I'm going to constrain the pole vector to this locator. So I'm going to I want to zero out all my translates and rotates on this locator. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Delete history, all that good stuff. And then I'm going to constrain this to my pole vector. So I'm going to select the driver first. So that's going to be the locator. And we'll go ahead and name this knee control. Right? This is, in a sense, this is a controller. So we're going to name this knee control. I'm going to select my knee control, shift select the IK handle, and we're going to go to constrain, pole vector constraint. So now we get a line that goes from our pole vector to our locator, indicating that these are constrained to each other. So now I can move my knee around. Let me just deselect that. Move my knee around, or move my leg around. And if I move this controller around, I can now move the knee around as well. So now I have control over the knee as well as the foot. Now, the next issue that we need to deal with is the fact that if I move the hip or the leg around here, our ankle kind of stays put, but our foot doesn't really stay planted on the ground. And we want our feet to stay planted on the ground. So let's create our actual reverse foot. So to do this, we're going to jump back into the side view here. I'm going to turn grid snapping back on, and I'm going to create a new joint structure. And this joint structure is going to be in reverse of our foot. So this is going to be in the reverse direction of our foot. So I'm going to go to our rigging menu. We're going to create our joint tool. And I'm going to start back here. This is going to be my heel, reverse heel. We're going to go to the reverse toe, the reverse ball, and we'll call this the reverse foot. Actually, we'll probably call this one the foot and this one the heel. So we have this reverse joint structure put in place now. And I want to name this appropriately, right? Again, if you're following along, I highly recommend going ahead and naming these. Otherwise, this will get a little bit confusing. So let's name this reverse foot. We will name this one reverse toe, reverse ball, and reverse heel. Okay, so now we have our reverse structure. Now we need something to constrain this reverse structure too. What this is going to allow us to do here is our feet will not only stay planted to the ground, but we will have a way where we can do like a toe roll or a ball roll like this. But in order to do that, we need something to connect these joints to. So for now, I'm just going to hide my reverse foot by selecting it and doing Control H, just to hide it for now. And then what I need to do is create more IK handles. So I need to create an IK handle that's going to go from the heel to the ball, and then one that goes from the ball to the toe. So I'm going to create an IK handle from here to here. And then I'm just going to hit G, which will grab the IK handle tool again and create an IK handle that goes from here to here. And then I want to name these appropriately. So I'm going to name this IK handle ball. We'll name it IK handle ball. Actually, I think I want to name this one toe. I'm not sure. We'll keep it at ball for now. And then I'm going to name this one IK handle toe. All right, so in our perspective view, we can see that we have these sort of IK handles here now on each one of our objects. So I'm going to unhide my reverse foot. So just select it and hit Shift H to unhide. And now I want to connect up all of these joints to the IK handle with some parent constraints. So I'm going to, let's expand my reverse foot. And I want to, in this situation, I want to parent the reverse toe to the reverse ball IK handle, right? So I want this reverse toe joint to parent the reverse ball joint. So I'm going to select the reverse toe, Control click the IK handle ball, and we're going to go to constrain and parent constraint. So now as I grab our reverse toe here and I rotate it, we should see everything sort of coming up like this. Right, let's let me make sure, let me just double check here that I got that right. You know what? It's worth doing it wrong just for the sake of showing that you can troubleshoot and figure things out to do it the right way. So I may be doing this wrong, but let's just move forward to be sure. Right, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select the reverse ball, and I think I want to connect that to the reverse IK. You know what? I think I am doing this wrong, so I'm going to back up here. Okay, so let's unhide our reverse foot, and I'm going to select our reverse foot and we're going to connect that one to the IK handle toe. Right, so we're going to do a parent constraint, and then I'm going to do the reverse toe to the reverse IK handle ball, parent constraint, and then I'm going to do the reverse ball to the IK handle foot, parent constraint. Now, if I did this correctly, I should be able to move this around. Let me turn off grid snapping. Should be able to move this around, rotate it around, and then if I select my reverse toe, I can roll the toe up. Reverse ball, I can roll the ball up, right? And if I grab my joint up here and I move that around, I can now move the leg around while the foot stays firmly planted on the ground. So this, in a nutshell, is the reverse foot. We could go a bit further and add controls. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go to curves, and we'll create a little circular control curve. And I want this to control where my foot goes. So I need to parent constrain the reverse foot to the controller curve. So let's go ahead and name this foot control. I'm going to select the driver, which is the controller, shift select the reverse foot, and do a parent constraint. So now as I move the controller around, the entire foot will move around. Now I want to set up some set-driven keys so I can control the ball roll and toe roll of my foot without needing to actually come in and selecting the joints, because oftentimes all of your joints are going to be hidden away in a group, and you want to be able to control your entire rig just with controllers and not have to go in and select your individual joints and possibly mess something up, right? So we want to be able to control everything we can with controllers and not needing to select our IK handles and joints. So I'm going to create some attributes. We're going to select this object. We're going to go to modify, add attribute. I'm going to create a toe roll attribute. And for this one, we'll do a minimum of -5, a maximum of 10, and a default of 0. Click add. Then I'm going to do a ball roll. Same thing, we'll do a minimum of -5, a maximum of 10, and a default of 0. Click add and close. So now I have those two attributes that I need. Now I'm going to connect them up. So I'm going to go to key, set driven key, set. We're going to load our driver, which in this case is the controller, load driver. And then the driven's going to change depending on which joint that we're actually controlling here. So we'll start with the toe roll. So I'm going to select the toe roll here for my driver. And then the driven is going to be the reverse foot toe, right? So this is the toe roll. So when I move this up, that's what I want to see. So everything is as it is at its default. So right off the bat, I can go ahead. If I select this, right? So I want to make sure that I'm selecting the rotate Z. So if I select rotate Z, I can just go ahead and key it as it is. Okay, so now I'm going to select the driver. I'm going to bring my toe roll down to -5. I'm going to select the reverse toe and I'm going to rotate it down below about the extreme where I want it to go if I want to animate it down a little bit. So this will be the -5, so I will key it there. We'll select the driver again. We'll bump this up to a 10. it seems like I may have forgotten to key it at 0. So I just want to double check. Yeah, I think I forgot to key that at 0. So let's do, you know what I didn't do? I didn't load the driven. So let's do that. So I want the reverse foot toe to be my driven. So let's load driven. We want rotate Z. So I'll go ahead and key it at its default. Well, then let's set that back to 0 and key it again. So now I'm going to go -5. We'll select the reverse toe, rotate it down a little bit, key it. Let's make sure that this is set correctly. Yep, -5, key it. So now I should be able to animate this, right? So now that animates down to -5. I'm going to move it up to +10. We'll select our reverse toe. We'll rotate that all the way up, key it. And now we should have this animate between -5 and +10. Okay, now we'll do the ball roll. So I'm going to reload my driven, which is going to be the reverse ball. So I'm going to load driven. We'll change this to reverse ball or ball roll. And then we're doing rotate Y. So I'm going to do rotate Y. We'll set it at its default, right? So key it at its default. We'll then go to the controller. We'll go down to -5. We will then select our reverse ball, rotate this down to where I want my -5 to be, somewhere around here. We will key it, move this back up to -10, whoops, or +10. We'll then select our reverse ball again, rotate that up to whatever I want that +10 to be, and key it. So then I can close my window here, and I have a ball roll and a toe roll that I can manipulate and move around on the controller, and I don't have to worry about selecting joints or IK handles or anything like that. Everything is going to be controlled on this controller, on these two controllers, right? So that is the reverse foot. I truly believe if you can manage to rig a reverse foot correctly, which doesn't always go off without a hitch. As you can see, that I kind of forgot what I was doing and I messed up a few times, but I've slowly figured it out. But I think if you can manage to rig a reverse foot correctly, you're well on your way to figuring out how to rig pretty much anything if you can rig a reverse foot. So that is the very basic principles of rigging. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have suggestions for other videos you'd like to see, please don't hesitate to comment and enjoy, and I'll see you next time.